I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank you all very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to speak about my community and also include information about other Bayou tribes in Louisiana. At first, when Carletta asked me to speak at a conference regarding arid lands, I thought, well, we're definitely not arid lands in Louisiana. We have all the kind of water that you probably don't want because it's saltwater intrusion that creates other types of issues. But often in our community, when we think about the West, we're like, is there a way we could pump them some of our water so we can share with them the water that we have here? So what I want to do is talk a little bit of a brief history about our communities, our current situation, and really the need to include cultural heritage in the dialogue of restoration, planning, and response efforts. I'm going to talk about my community, but I'm also going to share a little bit about the community next to us who is resettling, because I think that's very important to talk about the different choices that our communities are making when we're faced with these dire circumstances. And to talk a little bit about our rights and how they've been violated and what the picture looks like. So this picture that is on the screen right now, for those of you who can see, it's from the 1930s. This is a picture from Pointe-a-Chan. And I love this picture. I found this picture in an archive in Pennsylvania because of where we're located. We don't have a ton of pictures because we've gone through so many hurricanes and people have had to constantly rebuild. But this picture provides a lot of insight because everything we needed in the 1930s was available to us. We were a self-sustaining community. As you can see, the palmetto provided the homes. There was a lot of cypress. We had a lot of trees. We used the cypress to build boats. This is a pirogue. This is actually a medicine man who's in this pirogue. His name is George Billiot, and that's Evelyn Dardar, who's on the side of the bayou. But it just really provides evidence of this is a self-sustaining, self-determined community that was organized through our kinship, and we did not rely on the government for anything we needed. We had, the land was very lush and fertile. The Mississippi River topsoil replenished the earth, created new land, and the barrier islands protected us from storms. We had the medicine that we needed, we had fresh water, we had food, which was through our agricultural practices, the fish, game, and I just want you to note that, look at the houses, they're on the ground. So this is a very different picture than what we see today. And my mom was born in 1947, and she was born in one of these houses. And that's not really that long ago. But no one today could live in a house on the ground or even have enough palmetto to reconfigure the houses as they're needed. So these are just examples of people building the palmetto houses, working together, cooperative labor. This is a mud house made from mud and moss, and then with the palmetto top. And this is one of our ovens that people made to cook with. And so I just think it's important to kind of share that so you can see where we're coming from and the type of change that we've been facing and have faced. This context is all about self-determination. So the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has articles about self-determination, and that Indigenous peoples have the right to freely determine their political status, pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, which means they have the right to self-government, the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions, and also included in that you have the right to subsistence, religion, land, traditional ecological knowledge, traditional medicine, and cultural heritage. All of these things, I think, we were clearly exercising in the 1930s, the 1940s, you know, even in the 50s, But when you start losing those resources, you have to adapt. And then there are other barriers that come into place. And I want to talk about, well, how do you maintain that when you face such change? So this is a map from the 1730s of Louisiana. Oh, sorry. Okay, I know there's a pointer on here.
Be in the middle.
Okay, well, sorry about that. I lost it.
It's changing on this screen.
Okay. I am not technologically savvy, but
There you go.
okay.
Right now.
Okay. Okay, so this is a map of Louisiana from the 1730s, and I want y'all to see this whole area is occupied by tribes all along the coast. And this is a blow up of this one area, and this is where Pointe-au-Champ is, all in this area where you see these lakes. And they're called on this map Lac des Chitimaches, Lakes of the Chitimaches. And then you have some tribes down here, the Chawashas, Chitimaches, other Washa tribes, but you have tribes all along the coast. Now, this is a map from the 1890s. This is a Terrebonne Basin. And you can see these are all of those little lakes. Lake Felicity, Lake Chien, Lake Billiot. But this is all Pointe-au-Champ. And this is the 1890s. Now, this is a map of Louisiana, just to put it into context, that are tribes. And if you see down here, these are the tribes. This is the Terrebonne Basin. And all of these tribes in this area are not on a list recognized by the United States government. These are all state-recognized tribes. And you even have a non-status tribe over here who has neither state nor federal recognition. And so this means we have these whole communities who many times don't have a voice. So what does that mean, not having a voice in this landscape? Well, these are two maps, and the map on your left shows the land loss from 1932 and then land loss in 2010 on the right. So over the past 6 decades, we've had to adapt to this changing environment. And if you can guess right here, these communities are non-native communities. And the thing that separates those communities from our communities is that they have levies. Because what I will talk about is there are value judgments made as to what is important, and the tribal communities have not been important. And you see this rapid change from the 1930s to 2010. So, over the past 100 years, we've had over 1 million acres of coastal land lost, including wetlands. That's about 25 to 40 square miles a year. And 90% of coastal wetland loss in the United States is in Louisiana. And the fastest eroding area is this Terrebonne Basin. And that's home to us, Pointe-au-Champ, and also home to Ile-Jean-Charles. So I just think it's important, these decisions that were made to levy, there's also other decisions that we'll talk about, but the barrier islands have virtually disappeared. And I want you to note this. This is Lake Beret, right here, because I'm going to show you a community that doesn't exist anymore that was here. There's also some other communities over here, and further to the right, Barataria. As you can see, they're completely in the water now. But we had people living, villages, all around these areas. This is just another dramatic representation. You can see the red is the actual land loss since 1932. Okay, so what is causing this land loss? Well, to me, most of the damage is man-made. This damage is caused from man-made decisions, and these are now compounded by sea level rise and subsidence. The two biggest decisions was the rerouting of the Mississippi River, and the second was oil and gas exploration. So the damming of the Mississippi River took place in 1903, and so that prevented all the fresh water from coming and depositing in the bayous and replenishing the topsoil. So that results in increased flooding and coastal erosion. Oil and gas, about the time you saw that picture, a little bit before, they discovered oil and gas in Terrebonne Parish, in the Terrebonne Basin. And so there's all sorts of haphazard cuts with no accountability, and so that causes more erosion and saltwater intrusion. Okay, this is from the National Geographic, and this is in 1896. And from this statement, I'll read it to you. It says, "No doubt the great benefit to the present and 2 or 3 following generations accruing from a complete system of absolutely protective levees, excluding the floodwaters entirely from the great areas of the lower delta country, far outweighs the disadvantages to future generations from the subsidence of the Gulf Delta lands below the level of the sea and their gradual abandonment due to this cause." So at this time, this is 1896, they made a value judgment. Who was important? Who are we not worried about? We want to protect the people who live in this area from the overflow of the Mississippi River. So we want to control the Mississippi River, and the people below, unless they get levees, because there's no more freshwater flow, they're going to be basically cut off. So they knew that at this time, and they didn't do anything. And so this has basically resulted in relocation. And people don't talk about this. Like, nobody talks about some of these communities that have already relocated. And so I think that we should honor these people and recognize them. And I found some of these pictures of people from these communities from 1907, but we know they were living in these communities much later, till 1940s and 50s. So this is Lake Salvador, Washoe, and you can see there's a lot of cypress down the bayou. So a lot of people down there have these cypress homes. And then this is another community from Bayou Barataria. And this is another one from Point Barre, which is kind of close to where we are. And these places are completely underwater, including any of their burial mounds and resources. So I just wanted to share that with you. Now, this is a picture of the cutoff in Bayou Pointe-aux-Chenes in 1907. And you can see it's not that wide. People were working on their boats. They're in the cutoff, and this separates Terrebonne from Lafourche parishes. And this is a picture of it today. Okay, so this is, a picture I took not too long ago. And you can see the change. This is an example from the 1980s, an aerial picture of some of the cuts made by oil and gas companies, where they just go in and cut land any which way. Okay, so because of this, we have all of these environmental challenges. So in 2005, people know about Katrina and Rita. Well, we weren't hit. We had wind damage from Katrina, but Rita, we had 8 feet of water. And the same thing happened, Gustav, in 2008. The island was directly hit, and so we were also hit. But Ike, this is like almost in Texas, and we also had 8 feet of water. And then in 2010, we had the BP oil spill, which was particularly devastating to us, and had significant impacts on the community, the social, cultural, people worried about becoming a Superfund site if we had a hurricane that year, things of that nature. These are pictures from one of the floods. So some people stayed at home, but we got 8 feet of water in our community. Some of the houses, they're raised, but some weren't raised enough, obviously. And so you can see, you can't tell where the bayou is and where people's houses should be. And this individual, his house is raised 10 feet high. And so he's sitting on his porch and somebody's driving by taking a picture of him. But it's just to show the immensity and the power of these storms. Now, I want to share with y'all 2 short videos about Pointe-au-Chien and Ile-Jean-Charles because our communities are taking different approaches to adaptation. While she's doing that, I'll just tell you the island is located directly next to Pointe-au-Chien, so there's a road that was built in between us. The road never should have existed there. It was built, it was, you know, in Louisiana there's always these political sort of things. And so the road is washing away, and the parish says they're not going to rebuild the road. But they were always an island. Hopefully we'll be able to watch the video.
I am what I am. Nobody can move me. And if you try to move me, you got a problem. That's my home, my land, and I like it down here. So that's how we live. That's how we go. The island was very big. We had a lot of trees on both sides of the island. But now we got no trees. Just a few. Now our company has lakes and canals. And then after they dug the canal, the salt water could start to come in. And that's when the erosion started. So the salt water messed up everything.
We're the last thing that's holding. We're the last barrier islands. They've been trying to get us off of this land since I was a kid. We had bankers come here, try to say the land was theirs. We had all field people come here and say the land is theirs. Everybody is still trying to push us off this land.
My deal is to get a big enough piece of land and not have to worry about all spills and hurricane. Let's say we take this reservation here and we take it and we move it here. And this is the reservation.
So you wouldn't want the reservation to be on the island?
Well, would you?
Oh, we ain't carrying out. I was don't run the island. He's the chief, but he don't run us, you know. Maybe they want to take the island. Give that to the rich people, the millionaire. Hey, nobody can buy that island, Bonnie. Before they buy that island, there's going to be a war. See, when they were talking about moving the people on the island, I bought 200 bursts of ammunition, me. And I got 4 guns. The only thing I don't got is a machine gun. But I figured to put my ammo on. They know how to shoot them. You got the phone hammer, you got patches. See, the people think we're stupid on the island, but we're not.
No, you can play that. And then Sandy's here? Yes.
My name is Donald Ardor, and I'm from Warner. I guess it's in the blood because my dad did it, his dad before him did it. I guess their dad before them, so just father put it. Yeah, well, first time, we got the license back then, just grabbing it. But it was a line, set of feet, I guess every 6 foot on the line, and you have a little hand net. And the line would just follow the side of the boat. You just hit the crabs. A lot more water now than what we had. You know, when we grew up, we had too many trees behind my house, and I could get lost in the trees. But now it's a lot different. We used to have islands that was all going down. Years back, had a lot more protection.
So, I guess the reason why we got together is because last week the government finally issued new rules on the federal recognition process. All of the changes that people wanted were not made, but there are significant differences, I think, that will help our petition.
They said in 50 years this is completely gone, so I could believe it because if they don't do nothing on the outside or the islands, try to build some kind of protection, it's going to wash away. That's the best place to go. I don't know if anybody feels that way, but my house is right across the street, and I walk right to the Bayou side and get in my boat and go to work. I don't think somebody could ask for anything better than that. I'm a community maybe like a mile and a half long. On the other side of the Bayou, it's all Native American people, American Indians.
That's a big crab right there, huh?
If you ask who Donald Ardor is, at the last house on this end, or the first house on this end, I know everybody that lives down the road. So we're all family, everybody's family.
So I think those videos kind of put into perspective what the communities are dealing with. With regards to Ile-Jean-Charles, Mr. Albert, the chief of Ile-Jean-Charles, has been very strong in advocating for his people. The Army Corps of Engineers decided that it wasn't economically feasible to include them in a levee system. So they're totally excluded from this, huge levee system that's going into place. They just thought it wasn't cost effective, and so they're not included in it. And they built a ring levee around them, and so whenever it floods, when it flooded for either, I can't remember if it was Rita or Ike, the water just stayed in. So if the water stays in your home, if it doesn't subside, then that causes more problems. You get more mold, because a lot of people like to go in and clean up right away. And so they had water that was just in their homes because of that ring levee, so it didn't wash away. 90% of the people from the island have already relocated somewhere else because of the storms. And recently the tribe applied for some resiliency funding. And the tribe, because they're not federally recognized, had to apply through the state. And so they won. Like, they put together this whole proposal, and I'll show it to you, part of what their design is. And the problem right now is they have their goals and their ideas, but because they're not federally recognized, they have to work through the state, and the state has other ideas. And they've been very strong in advocating that they want to maintain everybody within the same community, that people want to move together because that's the only way they can maintain their cultural heritage, their ways of life, and their kinship systems to support each other. And they would actually be bringing other people who already relocated back to the village. And the HUD has told them that, you know, it's violation of federal discrimination laws to create a housing community just for the Ile-de-Jean-Charles people. So they're fighting with them about that because they want to, you know, just give people money and have them leave. And then their other thing that they're wrestling with is there's some rumors that they want to buy them out and take their land. And so that's what Mr. Edison Dardar was complaining about, like, you can't take my land. And under the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples, you have a right to your traditional lands even if you have to relocate or go somewhere else. And so the tribe is saying, no, we should be able to keep our land here, but also have a safe place to relocate. And so that's been a pretty huge issue. I wanted to show this picture. So this is a picture, aerial picture of Ile-de-Jean-Charles. And you can kind of see some crazy cuts on the side, and, you know, the oil and gas, that was land, you know, all around them. And they're just surrounded now by water. And this is their concept for their new village. They picked out a site. They worked on their concept. It was all part of their application. And the state said, well, we have to work with someone else to create a new vision. And they're like, this is what we want. You know, this is what we propose. And so they're having discussions about that. But I think they have spent a lot of time on this. Chief Albert has been advocating for this since 2002, when they knew they wouldn't be included in the hurricane protection levy. And they've lost so much since then. So anyway, I think it's important to realize these struggles, and they don't like being called refugees. So if anybody hears that term, or if you meet them, don't call them refugees because they don't want to be called refugees. They're resettling. It's basically a forced relocation. So, you know, kind of, as I mentioned, Article 26 says you have a right to land, territories, resources, which you have traditionally owned or occupied. And so that's what they're advocating for in this relocation. And other things within the Declaration which applies, they have cemeteries there. So they want to protect those historic sites and cemeteries. And this is all part of their advocacy for self-determination. And to be able to move together also applies to their ability to maintain their cultural rights and their identity. So I think that's important to point out. So the U.S. signed on to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but they conditioned the support. And they basically said, well, we already do this with the federally recognized tribes. So we, you know, try to advocate, well, Indigenous peoples isn't limited to, you know, tribes that are on the list. Like, it's more expansive. The term isn't limited to that. So we try to advocate that in things that we're doing, whether it's for adaptation or Chief Albert for their resettlement project. And so I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so for Pointe-au-Chien, we are trying to do something different. We're trying to adapt in place. part of our village where people currently live is included in this hurricane protection levy, but our community south of that cutoff that I showed y'all earlier, none of that is included in the levy. So obviously if a storm comes and you have a lock, then that water is going to be flooding everything below it. And we have a lot of sacred sites and cemeteries, village sites that are in that area. And we are trying to do things to protect them. What I'm showing you right here is basically, this is one of the oil canals. So this is what they originally look like. They're not that wide, but they just go through and they cut them everywhere. And this is how they expand. And if you see on this site, they basically cut through a mound area. In this area, there's a group of mounds, and they just cut on this side and they cut on the other side. Just, you know, we don't really know why they did this. Like, they kind of made markers for themselves of where they're going to drill or explore and things of that nature. And this mound in particular, this summer there was a storm, I think in Mexico, and so we had a lot of water come in, and part of this mound broke off into the water. So this is what you're seeing is a part that's into, now it's, that part is submerged now. So subsidence is one thing when it's natural, but the way that the waters are coming in because of the cuts, it's cutting now up lands, and that, you know, to us is not acceptable. We're actually working with our parish and NOAA. We applied for some funding to try to stabilize this site. And so we did get funding for that, and they have to do an environmental assessment, and I think it probably will start next summer. Other things we're doing is we're doing community gardens. We've been, we're building a raised, when I mean raised, I mean like 8 feet in the air, medicinal garden, because a lot of our plants now are not, you know, available except on some of these mound sites because they're high. Some of these plants are still growing there, but in other places, because of the salt water, you can't, they're not accessible. And then we met with another tribe to see, hey, what do you have that we don't have anymore so that we can grow in our area. This is also a cut, and this is a cut by an oil company. And what they're doing is they're cutting, and they're cutting into a burial mound. And so what our people did in Pointe-au-Champ is we went out with guns, kind of like Edison. People from the Bayou are kind of fearless, and went out with guns and forced them to stop, and then they sued us, you know, because they claimed that it was their land, and so then we sued them. So we have this ongoing legal battle from the 1990s where we claim this as our Aboriginal land. And, you know, no one should be able to cut through a cemetery anyway, you know, whether it's your land or not. But, so that case has been sitting in federal district court in New Orleans since the 90s. And the judge there has said, well, we can't rule on this case until the federal government decides whether or not to recognize you as a tribe. Which, you don't have to do that, but that's what that judge decided. I think some of you are probably familiar with the National Historic Preservation Act. And the thing that I want to say about this is, under this, the State Historic Preservation Officer, you know, every 4 years they're supposed to review significant threats to properties included in or eligible for inclusion on the National Register to ascertain the threats and recommend proposed actions. And they have never done this, like for this Terrebonne Basin. So if you look at what's on the National Register for Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes, I don't think we'd be surprised, because we're so proud of our racist culture, that the things that are on that site are plantation homes. Like for Terrebonne Parish, that's the only thing that's on there. So right now we're working on a project for a traditional landscape. And of course, it's controversial for our tribe because we want to make sure that certain things aren't known publicly. And so to maintain some of that privacy while also trying to protect the area. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. If y'all aren't familiar with this, in 2015 there was a Cantico call for action on climate impacts on cultural heritage. And so the conference that Carletta mentioned is kind of an extension of that, but to specifically talk about that in the tribal context, our tribe has signed on to that call to action. I think if people are interested, it's online. But because cultural heritage hasn't been really addressed in climate policy, I think it's important to talk about, especially the intangible property that Native peoples have, or the way of life, which isn't like a fort or other things that people really move to protect. Okay, so our hope, really, I want to kind of close this out so we can have questions, is we want to protect our sacred sites, get them registered, advocate for inclusion in plans for coastal erosion. I think all of our communities on the Gulf Coast need to secure federal recognition so we can really be at the table, because like I said, these value judgments are made, and they're made because they don't think our voices are important. And we need to have support for our voices and support for inclusion, because with oil and gas, the importance is oil and gas. It's not necessarily people, their ways of life, the indigenous communities, or other unrepresented communities. So with that, I'd just like to turn it over for questions. Okay, this is a very good question. So there's one question. It says, have any of the oil and gas companies been forced to restore any of their canal cuts? What would it take to make it happen in the future? I think this is a fantastic question. There was a case, I think it was Terrebonne Parish versus School Board versus Castex in 2005. And the court held that the oil lessee has no implied duty to backfill oil field access canals under Louisiana law. And when Bobby Jindal was the governor a few years ago, he was actually trying to prevent any lawsuits against oil and gas for these oil cuts by prevent the parishes from bringing any claims. Now there are some claims moving forward. And I think the other thing that's interesting now is like with the climate report that recently came out that directly ties climate change to specific industries, like maybe that could be included, but in Louisiana it has not been successful so far. There are some suits that parishes are bringing to move forward, but the state legislature actually had bills to try to prevent any lawsuits against these private companies. Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? But I mean, one thing that happened with the BP oil spill, and you have, people's livelihoods and lives that are threatened. The governor was down there, and he's, touching the water, and there's oil everywhere, and we have birds that are covered in oil. We have, sites that are being desecrated. And, they're complaining about the moratorium on offshore oil drilling. They're not worried about the people or the places and the impacts on that. So we really need to, change that conversation and, change what's important. And I think we have a long road with regards to that because, oil and gas interests are so strong in Louisiana. Okay. Where did people go who were displaced? Where did people who were displaced during the storm go? What challenges did they face during this time of relocation? So during the storm, some people stay at home, some people leave. But it's interesting, people usually come home right away. So they might drive, to North Louisiana or somewhere. Or go to, my mom's house is north of Baton Rouge, and so a bunch of people, go to her house and, she doesn't have electricity either, but, there's shrimp's full of freezer, they bring their shrimp and everybody cooks. And then they try to go home as soon as they can. They have some people who don't leave because they're scared they can't get back in and they want to be able to, I guess kind of survey and protect the area. During one of the last storms, we had an elder who the parish was trying to get him to leave, and he wouldn't leave. And I didn't tell y'all this, but our community, we speak, we call it Indian French. It's a version of French, which isn't French in France, and it's not Cajun French. It's the French with all these, mixed with all these Indian words. And people in our communities weren't allowed to go to high school until the 1960s. So we still have a lot of people who only speak French or grew up with French as their first language. And so we had this elder, and he would not leave, and the authorities wanted him to leave. And so the authorities contacted our chairman. They said, you need to get him to leave. So he went to go see him, and he goes, well, I'm not going to leave until someone helps me take my boat out of the water. And so a bunch of people helped him take his boat out of his water, because that's his livelihood, and if his boat gets destroyed, then, he was concerned about that. So I just think that's interesting. So people they'll leave and they don't go, some people don't go that far, they go like 30 minutes away. Because 30 minutes away, they're not flooding, or 15, 20 minutes away. They're not flooding because, as you see in that area, they're protected by a levee. So some people don't go that far. They might go to other relatives who live in those levee areas, and then they go back home. The question is, has the lineal dissonancy and ancestral kinship established a right to the traditional homelands? So where Pointe-au-Chien people live right now, most of the land is owned, it's never been probated. We have a probate that's been open since 1900. So you know that they can't be like a non-Indian community to have a probate open since 1900. But where people currently live, it's determined by families who can live in certain places, and you have to ask for permission, and it's kind of divided by the different family groups. I think it's different on the island, but it is tied to your family on the island. Now, most people lived further south of the cutoff, so a lot of those people who now live like where my grandma's house is, have relocated, right? Because we had other villages, sub-communities of Pointe-au-Chien that were further down the bayou, and all those people have had to relocate, and they've come to the current village where people live now. This question, I think, is kind of like the first question, a little different, but can we sue oil and gas for altering their environment and contributing to these impacts? I think this is a real climate justice issue that we have a really good attorney in Louisiana. He's an environmental law attorney, and he's been thinking about these issues because, when does your claim run? If they started cutting the oil canals in the 1930s, when should you have known that you could sue them for the impacts? And things like that. There's a child case moving forward in the climate justice arena, that's focusing on the rights of the child to the environment. And so we're thinking about different types of claims. I will tell you that, I know this is being recorded, but oil and gas, we're working towards federal recognition, and so our fights with our land are against oil and gas, the oil and gas companies, and so when I was looking through our petition at the federal government, the only people who commented on it was oil and gas, because I think they have an interest in us not securing, our land rights or our recognition.
Talk louder, try to.
I can't hear.
So what happens to those land rights once the land becomes submerged, either individual land rights or what's their tribal? Do you maintain gain some access rights to those?
So right now, we basically protect the area. We still burn the marsh grass to try to renew the land, even though people don't live there. We have certain people, like our people are fishermen, so they know the land, and right now we're engaged in this TEK mapping project to try to get things renamed to our names, and also as part of our effort to try to propose this cultural landscape, because oil and gas companies come in with permitting, and there's going to be different projects that are done, and if you're not on the state database, then they don't know that you exist. So, like, some of the land we own collectively, and other land, oil and gas claims, and that's the land that's being litigated, but we still use that land. We have some people who have cattle, which is interesting. I should have pictures of the cattle that swim. But a lot of fishing grounds, and then we have a lot of cemeteries that people ensure that they're protected, and people still duck hunt and hunt other animals in the marsh. So we still are using it, but we can't use it in the same way. And so when they're submerged, we're still claiming it, even though it's submerged. Although there's a lot of, sports fisher people who wouldn't really know what is now available for them to fish versus ours. So we had this sports fisherman who tried to get wildlife and fisheries to give a ticket to one of our tribal members. And so we entered into an agreement with him where he recognized that that was our Aboriginal land and that we were allowing him to use that land. Like, we entered into a settlement with him. And he kind of liked that because somehow he got this agreement from the school board, and that we would then make sure that once duck season was coming, then we would take our crab traps out of the water, and because he doesn't want to fight with the Indians, because we know where everything is, and was very respectful of that process. But we had to assert, well, this is our Aboriginal land, don't you recognize it? Yeah, I recognize that. So to get people to admit that, I think, and be aware of that is important. But a lot of people, all they see is open land for hunting, fishing, and things of that nature. So you kind of have to assert it, but it's kind of tiresome, too, to have to do that all the time.
Any other comments from the audience?
There was another question.
Oh, I have a voting question. Relating to your other work, what can be done to improve Native communities' access to voting in U.S. elections? This is a very important question. It just doesn't have anything to do with the topic that I was talking about, but I'm very passionate about this. And our rights are constantly being undermined in the election system, and I think we have to be very diligent. Right now, there's voting hearings going on around the country, and I encourage you to participate in any of those if you recognize any voting irregularities or issues. They're being put on by the Native American Voting Rights Coalition. We know that Native Americans are targeted and other minority communities, and if your community should have language access, you should demand it. If you don't have a polling location, you should demand it. And if you have any other questions about that, please feel free to email me.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you very
give her a
much.
round of applause. It's very wonderful to hear this keynote. It's very interesting to see the different things that Patty has done with her tribe, and I hope that we have learned some lessons from that. So I thank her, and I actually had the opportunity to go visit her home. It was very different. We went there was another friend of ours from one of the pueblos. So they had a bunch of southwestern desert tribal people not knowing how to eat shrimp. Her uncle made shrimp and just poured out on this big table, and he showed us how to eat shrimp. He was a little frustrated with us on how slow we were, but it was pretty fun to visit her home. So thank you, Patty. If you'd like to talk to Patty, she'll be up here. At this time, we're going to break for networking opportunities in Sierra One, where we have displays and posters. And then at 2 p.m., we have the Tribal Education Forum, which will be in Sierra 5. Thank you.